Summary of Founding Brothers by Joseph J. Ellis. At the time, it seemed unlikely or impossible that the American Revolution would happen, but now it seems inevitable. The leaders of the revolution spoke with the confidence of people who knew they would leave important marks on history, but they didn't know if their experiment would work. It is important to find a balance between using hindsight as a tool and trying to understand past events in their right context and imagining how they would have felt at the time. The last 10 years of the 18th century were a very important time in American history. A lot of what happened in this short time period still affects the country's future to this day. Founding Fathers is about the 8 most important political leaders of the time of the American Revolution: John Adams, Abigail Adams, Aaron Burr, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and George Washington. It tells their story through a series of 6 episodes that all focus on the same 4 main ideas: the revolutionary generation's ability to work together, the close connection between the personal and the political, their inaction on the issue of slavery, and the fact that the Founding Fathers knew they were making history. The first part is about the fight between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. William Van Ness and Nathaniel Pendleton, 2 of the men's loyal followers, came with them to the fight. Hamilton agreed to the fight with Burr because he was never afraid of a challenge. He wrote that he meant to throw away his first shot. It's not clear what happened when the 2 guys started shooting at each other. After they did that, Hamilton was hurt, so Pendleton and his doctor took care of him. The next day, he died, and people remembered him as a hero. Burr was slandered, and he ran away to Georgia, ending his political career for good. People had a lot of ideas about what happened during the fight, and people still have different ideas about what happened today. The 2 men had been enemies for a long time, and Burr blamed Hamilton for his embarrassing loss in the 1803 election for governor of New York. Hamilton said that his complaints of Burr had nothing to do with who Burr was as a person, but in fact, it was hard to tell the difference. Even though they were upset with each other, it seems likely that neither man wanted to seriously hurt the other. In the second chapter, Jefferson hosts a dinner party where the Compromise of 1790 is reached. At the time, Congress couldn't agree on Hamilton's financial plan, which called for the federal government to take over state bills. At the dinner, Madison agreed to bring the plan back to the House, but only if the capital was moved to the Potomac. Madison wrote the Federalist Papers with Hamilton and John Jay, but he had become an anti-federalist by the time the book came out. Since he had been in France for a while, Jefferson didn't know as much about the problems being talked about at the dinner. Because of who he was a good mediator and was able to help Madison and Hamilton come to an agreement. The question of where to put the city was called the residency question. In March 1790, 16 different places were being thought about, and it seemed likely that one would be in Pennsylvania. Along with Jefferson's dinner, it's likely that there were many other meetings and talks around this time to talk about the resident question and assumption. After the choices were made, it was hard because many people were shocked by both what was assumed and where the capital was put, on the Potomac. The Compromise of 1790 stopped a big political fight, but the problems that led to the fight in the first place still existed. In the third chapter, we learn about how people sent letters to Congress calling for an end to the slave trade and slavery. The first petition was sent by Quaker representatives, and the second was sent by the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. Benjamin Franklin signed the second petition. Since Franklin backed the requests, they had to be taken seriously. A part of the Constitution said that Congress couldn't do anything to stop the slave trade until 1808. Some lawmakers even said that it was illegal to talk about slavery. James Jackson and William Loughton Smith of Georgia give 2 long talks in favor of slavery. This is the first time that a pro-slavery case has been made in Congress. The petitions were sent to a committee by a vote of 43 to 11. Even though the Declaration of Independence could be seen as an unambiguous tract for abolition, not much was done after the Revolutionary War to end slavery. During the Constitutional Convention, there was a big difference between the states that had slaves and the states that did not. In 1790, there were two practical problems with the idea of gradual emancipation: the large amount of money it would cost, because most politicians thought slaveholders should be paid for their losses, and the fact that freed black people would have to move, because most politicians thought white and black people couldn't live together. Many people thought that freedom was impossible because of all of these problems. Most of the founding fathers were against slavery in theory, but they weren't ready to do anything about it because they thought it would tear the country apart. In the end, the committee created a report that made vague references to justice and humanity, but it also proved that Congress could not do anything to end slavery until 1808. The end of George Washington's time as president and his farewell address are the main topics of the fourth chapter. Washington was ready to leave office after his second term, and he was also eager to show that he wasn't acting more like a king than a president, as some people had said. Ellis says it's important to read the farewell address in the same setting in which it was written. Federalists and Republicans were at odds with each other very strongly at the end of Washington's term. Jefferson was so against federalism that he came up with a conspiracy theory that the Federalists were planning to take over the government in an unfriendly way and that Washington must be senile because he was letting it happen. Washington's farewell address was written with help from Hamilton. In it, Washington asked for people to work together and stay out of other countries' business. He didn't talk about slavery, which shows that he had mixed feelings about it and didn't do anything about it. Most people liked the address, but those who didn't like Washington kept saying he acted like a king. This criticism didn't bother Washington much, and he stayed proudly true to his beliefs until the end of his life. In 1796, America had its first presidential election that was challenged. This is where the fifth chapter starts. Jefferson and Adams were the two front-runners. Even though they had different political views, they had always been close friends because the Revolution had brought them together. Adams had been Washington's vice president, which he found to be a terribly powerless job. During this time, the political differences between Adams and Jefferson became so explosive that their friendship was on the verge of breaking. As the election got closer, both Adams and Jefferson said at first that they didn't want to be president. Adams quickly admitted that this wasn't true, though. In the end, Adams won the election by a small margin over Jefferson, and he and his old friend offered to work together as president and vice president from different parties. Jefferson agreed to be vice president, but he turned down the plan to work with both parties. He said it was because of personal reasons. Adams took over as president with a lot of problems, like the fight between Federalists and Republicans and the undeclared war against France. He didn't pay much attention to his staff and only asked Abigail for help. He made a number of difficult choices about foreign policy, like putting his son John Quincy in charge of relations with Prussia, which worked out in the end. But his backing for the Alien and Sedition Acts was bad and helped speed up the end of the Federalist system. In the meantime, Jefferson hired a slanderer to write a book about Adams that was full of lies. In 1800, Jefferson and Burr were chosen as president and vice president, and Adams came in third. After this, Adams and Jefferson didn't talk to each other for 12 years. Adams moved back to his home in Quincy, Massachusetts, but he was still angry about his political losses and what his opponents did. When Jefferson's youngest daughter died during childbirth in 1804, Abigail sent him a letter of condolences that he thought was an attempt to make peace. Abigail was angry about this, so she yelled at Jefferson for all the ways he had hurt her husband. After this, Quincy and Monticello didn't talk to each other for another 8 years. Adams started writing to Benjamin Rush in the meantime. In his writings, Adams attacked the version of the Revolution that had become popular in recent years. This version was too romanticized and too simple. His own story was much messy and much harsher on the leaders of the change. Rush wrote in 1809 that he had a dream that Adams and Jefferson made up, started writing to each other, and then died almost at the same time. Adams thought that this dream could be a prophecy, but it took him 2 more years to talk to Jefferson about it. In 1812, the guys finally started writing to each other. They talked about the Revolution, argued about politics and other things, and forgiven each other for hurting each other. By the late 1810s, they were some of the only people left from the age of the American Revolution. They wrote that they were looking forward to seeing their band of brothers again in the future. Jefferson fell into a coma on July 3, 1826, just one day before the 50th anniversary of freedom. The next day, on July 4, both he and Adams died, just as Rush had said they would.
About the author. Joseph J. Ellis went to the College of William and Mary for his BA and Yale University for his PhD in 1969. Before taking a job in the history department at Mount Holyoke College, he taught at the United States Military Academy. In the end, he was given the Ford Foundation Chair in History and acted as the college's president for a short time. Ellis's study is mostly about the Founding Fathers, the American Revolution, and the time when the Federalist Party was in power. He has written biographies of John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and George Washington, as well as many other books about the Revolutionary War and its effects. He lives with his wife, Ellen Wilkins Ellis, and their 3 children in western Massachusetts.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.